A routine traffic stop spirals into a nightmare when Officer Mitchell arrests a black teenager for suspicious behavior, only to discover hours later that the young man is Judge Harrison's son. As the truth unravels in a packed courtroom, one officer's career and conscience hang in the balance, exposing the razor-thin line between authority and abuse. The streetlights flickered on as dusk settled over Maple Ridge. Officer Derek Mitchell cruised through the quiet neighborhood, his patrol car rolling past manicured lawns and two-story colonials. His radio crackled softly. Everything seemed routine. Then he saw him. A black teenager walked along the sidewalk, backpack slung over one shoulder, head down. Mitchell's eyes narrowed. The kid didn't belong here. Wrong neighborhood. Wrong time of day. Mitchell had seen this pattern before. He pulled the cruiser to the curb and stepped out. His hand rested on his belt, fingers near his radio. "Hey, stop right there." The teenager turned, surprise crossing his face. "Me? Yeah, you. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" Mitchell's voice carried authority, the tone that expected compliance. "Walking home." The kid's voice was steady but cautious. "I live 2 blocks over." Mitchell stepped closer. "ID, now." "I didn't do anything wrong." The teenager's hands stayed visible, palms forward. "I'm just walking." "That's not what I asked." Mitchell's jaw tightened. The kid was being evasive, defensive, classic signs. "ID, last time I'm asking nicely." The teenager slowly reached for his back pocket. Mitchell's hand moved to his weapon. Slowly. "Keep your hands where I can see them. I'm getting my wallet." "That's all." The kid's voice cracked slightly. His hands trembled as he pulled out a worn leather wallet. Mitchell snatched it, flipping it open. Marcus Harrison. 17 years old. Local address. Everything checked out on paper, but something felt off. The kid was too nervous, too defensive. "What's in the backpack?" "Books, SAT prep materials." Marcus's eyes stayed locked on Mitchell's face. "I just came from the library." "Open it." Marcus's shoulders sagged. He slid the backpack off slowly, unzipping it with deliberate movements. Inside, textbooks, notebooks, pencils. Nothing suspicious. But Mitchell's instincts screamed otherwise. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." "What?" "Why?" Marcus's voice rose. "I showed you everything." "I didn't do anything." "You're being detained for suspicious behavior and failure to comply." Mitchell pulled out his handcuffs. "Turn around now." "This is insane." Marcus's voice shook with anger and fear. "You can't just arrest me for walking." "I can, and I am." "Last warning." Marcus turned slowly, his jaw clenched. The handcuffs clicked around his wrists, cold metal against warm skin. Mitchell guided him toward the patrol car, one hand firm on his shoulder. Neighbors watched from their porches. A woman held her phone up, recording. Marcus caught her eye, his expression a mixture of humiliation and disbelief. Mitchell opened the back door. "Watch your head." Marcus ducked into the car, his voice barely a whisper but carrying steel. "My father will hear about this." Mitchell slammed the door shut. The sound echoed through the quiet street like a gunshot. Derek Mitchell had worn the badge for 15 years, decorated twice for bravery, commended for his instincts in dangerous situations. He knew his precinct like he knew his own reflection. Every street corner, every trouble spot, every pattern that meant danger. He'd grown up in a working-class neighborhood where respect for authority wasn't optional. His father had been military, his grandfather a cop. Service ran in his blood. He believed in order, protocol, and the thin blue line that kept chaos at bay. Mitchell prided himself on reading people. Body language told him everything he needed to know. Nervous movements, evasive answers, defensive postures, these were universal signs of guilt. He'd learned to trust his gut over explanations. Explanations could lie. Instincts didn't. Tonight felt like any other shift. Patrol the neighborhoods, keep watch, respond to calls. Maple Ridge was his territory. Quiet streets where nothing usually happened. That's what made the teenager stand out. Wrong place, wrong profile, wrong time. Mitchell genuinely believed he served everyone equally. He'd never thought of himself as prejudiced. He arrested criminals regardless of color. But certain patterns had become automatic. Certain neighborhoods, certain looks, certain responses that triggered his training. As he drove toward the precinct, Marcus silent in the back seat, Mitchell felt righteous. He'd stopped a potential burglary, protected the community, done his job. The kids' protests meant nothing. Guilty people always claimed innocence. Meanwhile, 2 miles away, Marcus Harrison sat in 7th period AP Literature. Not anymore. That was 3 hours ago. Before the library. Before SAT prep. Before everything shattered. Marcus was 17, honor roll every semester, debate team captain with college scouts already calling. His bedroom walls displayed acceptance letters from universities he'd barely dared to dream about. Princeton, Yale, Stanford, his future stretched before him like a golden road. His father had raised him to believe in systems, in fairness, in justice as more than a word. Judge William Harrison had built his career on impartiality, on weighing evidence, on giving every defendant their due process. Marcus had grown up in courtrooms, watching his father balance scales. The law protects everyone, his father would say. That's what makes it sacred. Marcus had believed him, had trusted that respect and compliance would keep him safe. That following rules mattered more than appearances. That being a good kid meant something. Tonight, handcuffed in the back of a patrol car, those beliefs felt like childish fairy tales. His SAT prep book sat in an evidence bag. His phone had been confiscated before he could call home. His words had meant nothing against the badge. The teenager who'd left for the library that afternoon was gone. The person sitting in the patrol car was someone different, someone who'd learned the world worked differently than he'd been told. Mitchell pulled into the precinct parking lot. Through the rearview mirror, he saw Marcus's face, young, frightened, angry. For a split second, something flickered in Mitchell's chest. Doubt? Sympathy? He pushed it away. The job required certainty. Hesitation got cops killed. He opened the back door. Let's go. Marcus stepped out slowly, shoulders squared despite the handcuffs. His eyes met Mitchell's, and for a moment the officer saw something that made him uncomfortable. Not guilt, not fear. Dignity. Quiet, unshakable dignity. Mitchell looked away first. The precinct smelled like burnt coffee and industrial cleaner. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in harsh white light. Mitchell guided Marcus through the intake process with mechanical efficiency. Empty your pockets. Everything on the counter. Marcus complied silently. Wallet, keys, chapstick, a crumpled receipt from the library. Mitchell logged each item, his handwriting neat and practiced. The desk sergeant, O'Brien, glanced up from his paperwork. His eyes moved from Mitchell to Marcus, then back. What have we got? Suspicious behavior in Maple Ridge. Kid was casing houses. Mitchell's voice carried certainty, evasive when questioned. Resisted compliance. I did not resist. Marcus's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. I answered every question. I showed him my ID, my backpack, everything he asked for. O'Brien's eyes narrowed slightly. That true, Mitchell? He was defensive and non-compliant. Mitchell didn't look at Marcus. Classic pre-burglary pattern. Wrong neighborhood, wrong time, couldn't explain his presence adequately. I explained exactly where I was going. Marcus's hands clenched into fists. I lived 2 blocks from where he stopped me. I was walking home from SAT prep. Mitchell pulled out his notepad, flipping through pages. Subject became agitated when questioned. Refused to cooperate initially. Exhibited suspicious behavior consistent with criminal intent. The lies hung in the air like smoke. Marcus stared at Mitchell, disbelief washing over his features. You're lying. You're actually lying in an official report. Watch your mouth, kid. Mitchell's voice hardened. Making false accusations against an officer won't help your case. O'Brien sighed, the sound heavy with bureaucratic exhaustion. Take him to holding. We'll sort it out. I get a phone call. Marcus's voice rose. That's my right. I want to call my father. Mitchell picked up Marcus's phone from the property bag. You'll get your call when processing is complete. Standard procedure. That's not standard procedure. Marcus's voice shook now, anger and fear mixing. You're supposed to let me call immediately. Settle down. Mitchell's hand moved to his belt. Don't make this worse for yourself. Marcus fell silent, but his eyes burned. He'd grown up around law enforcement, knew the procedures, recognized when they were being deliberately ignored. Mitchell was boxing him in, controlling the narrative before anyone could hear his side. They moved through the corridor toward the holding cells. The precinct was quiet tonight, just a few officers doing paperwork, a drunk sleeping it off in cell 3. Marcus's footsteps echoed against the linoleum. Mitchell opened cell 2. Inside, someone will process you shortly. Marcus stepped into the small space. The door clanged shut, lock clicking into place with mechanical finality. He turned to face Mitchell through the bars. Why? His voice was quiet now, stripped of anger. Just genuine confusion. I didn't do anything. Why are you doing this? Mitchell met his gaze for a moment. The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither fully grasped yet. The officer's jaw worked silently. Because I know trouble when I see it. Mitchell turned away. Someone will take your statement later. He walked down the corridor without looking back. Behind him, Marcus stood in the cell, backpack still lying in evidence, phone confiscated, voice unheard. Across town, Judge William Harrison glanced at his watch. 7:30. Marcus should have been home by now. He picked up his phone, dialing his son's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then voicemail. The judge frowned, unease settling into his chest. Marcus always answered. Always he dialed again. Same result. Something was wrong. Marcus sat on the concrete bench, arms wrapped around himself despite the holding cell's stale warmth. The walls pressed in, grey paint scuffed and peeling, decades of desperation absorbed into cinderblock. A toilet stood in the corner. No privacy, no dignity. His mind replayed the encounter in loops. The moment Mitchell's eyes had locked onto him. The instant transformation from teenager to threat. Nothing Marcus said had mattered. His explanations dissolved against Mitchell's certainty, like water against stone. The fear returned now, away from the officer's gaze. His hands had shaken when Mitchell's fingers moved toward his gun. That split second when Marcus wondered if he'd die on a suburban sidewalk for the crime of walking home. His heart still hammered against his ribs, but beneath the fear lived something sharper, humiliation. Mrs. Chen from 3 doors down had watched him get handcuffed. She'd known him since he was 8, had given him cookies every Christmas. What would she think now? What story would spread through the neighborhood? Marcus closed his eyes, seeking the calm his father had taught him. When the world treats you unfairly, Judge Harrison had said, don't let anger consume you. Channel it, use it, make it matter. The words felt hollow now. His father had built a career on believing the system worked. That fairness existed, that truth triumphed. But Marcus sat in a holding cell for walking while black, and truth hadn't saved him. He thought about his college applications. Princeton's interview next week. Would this arrest show up? Would Mitchell's lies become permanent record? His future felt suddenly fragile. A house of cards one officer could demolish with dishonest paperwork. A door clanged somewhere in the building. Voices drifted through the walls, muffled and indistinct. Marcus waited for someone to come, to take his statement, to let him call home. Minutes crawled past like hours. His mother would be setting dinner. His younger sister probably finishing homework at the kitchen table. Normal life continuing while he sat locked away. Did they know yet? Were they worried? Marcus's fingers traced the edge of the concrete bench. Cold, unyielding, real. This was happening. This was real. Not a misunderstanding that would clear up quickly. Not a mistake that an apology would fix. This was power wielded carelessly, assumptions codified into arrests. his voice erased by a badge. The teenager who'd left for SAT prep believed in fairness. The person in this cell knew better. Something hardened in his chest. Not quite anger, not quite resignation, something else. Determination, maybe, or recognition. The world had shown him its true face tonight. He would remember. His father's voice echoed through memory. The system only works when those in power remember they serve everyone, Marcus whispered to the empty cell. Then we fix the system. Marcus was 7 when his father first took him to court. Judge William Harrison had wanted his son to understand what justice looked like beyond textbooks and theory. They sat in the gallery, Marcus's small legs swinging above the floor, watching his father preside over a case. A young man stood accused of theft. Poor, desperate, public defender barely awake. The prosecutor pushed for maximum sentencing, citing prior arrests. The gallery waited for the gavel to fall, but Judge Harrison had asked questions about circumstances, about addiction programs, about whether punishment or rehabilitation served society better. In the end, he'd sentenced the young man to treatment instead of prison. Afterward, Marcus had asked why. He broke the law, didn't he? His father had knelt down, eye level with his son. Justice isn't about punishment, Marcus. It's about understanding. Context matters. Circumstances matter. Our job isn't to destroy people. It's to help them become better. But what if they don't deserve help? Everyone deserves the chance to be seen fully, to be heard. That's what the system promises. Judge Harrison had squeezed his son's shoulder. When we forget that, we become the problem. Marcus had carried those words through childhood, through middle school when teachers profiled him based on appearance, through high school when security guards followed him through stores. His father's certainty had been his armor. The system works. Justice prevails. Truth matters. He'd worked twice as hard as his white classmates, knowing excellence was his shield. Perfect grades, perfect behavior, perfect speech. If he did everything right, the world would treat him fairly. Tonight had shattered that illusion like glass. Meanwhile, Derek Mitchell's childhood had taught different lessons. His father, a Marine Corps sergeant, had raised him on hierarchy and instinct. Trust your gut, son. It'll keep you alive when rules won't. Mitchell had learned young that the world divided into order and chaos. Authority maintained the line between them. Respect for the badge wasn't optional, it was survival. Question authority, and everything collapsed. His training reinforced these beliefs. Pattern recognition, threat assessment, split-second decisions. Mitchell genuinely believed he served justice. He'd stopped robberies, de-escalated domestic violence, talked down suicidal teenagers. He'd seen the worst of humanity and kept communities safe, but his patterns had blind spots. Certain neighborhoods triggered certain assumptions. Certain appearances suggested certain behaviors. These shortcuts had become instinct, automatic responses his conscious mind never examined. He'd never thought of himself as racist. He had black colleagues he respected. He'd arrested white criminals without hesitation. In his mind, he judged behavior, not skin color. But behavior itself was interpreted through lenses he'd never questioned. A white teenager in Maple Ridge was a resident. A black teenager was suspicious. White nervousness was normal caution. Black nervousness was guilt. These equations ran beneath his awareness, shaping every interaction. Tonight, those blind spots had collided with the judge's son, and neither man yet understood the consequences approaching, like a freight train through fog. Judge Harrison called the police station for the 3rd time. This is Judge William Harrison. My son, Marcus Harrison, left the library 3 hours ago. He hasn't come home. I need to know if any incidents were reported in the Maple Ridge area. The desk sergeant's voice carried sudden tension. Judge Harrison? Hold, please. The line went silent. Then, sir, could you come to the precinct? We need to speak with you in person. The judge's blood ran cold. Judge William Harrison pushed through the precinct doors at 11:47 p.m. His usual judicial calm had cracked, replaced by parental terror barely contained. He'd driven 12 miles in 8 minutes, every red light a personal insult. Desk Sergeant O'Brien looked up. His face went pale. "Judge Harrison, Where is my son?" The judge's voice cut like a blade. "You said there was an incident. Where is Marcus?" O'Brien stood quickly, hands raised in placation. "Sir, there's been a situation. Your son was brought in earlier tonight. He's in holding cell 2. He's safe. He's holding cell?" Harrison's voice rose, judicial composure shattering. "My son is in a holding cell." "On what charges?" "Suspicious behavior. Officer Mitchell made the arrest around 6:30. O'Brien reached for a file. There were no injuries. "He's been processed and suspicious behavior." The judge's eyes blazed. "That's not a crime. That's barely probable cause. Where's the arresting officer?" "Sir, if you'll just get Officer Mitchell now." Harrison's courtroom authority filled the space. "And bring me to my son, immediately." O'Brien scrambled for his radio. Within seconds, commotion rippled through the building. Officers emerged from back rooms. Captain Torres appeared, hastily buttoning his uniform shirt. The name Harrison had triggered alarms throughout the precinct. "Judge Harrison." Torres extended his hand. "I apologize for the confusion. If you'd known he was my son, you'd have treated him differently." Harrison didn't take the offered hand. "That's precisely the problem, Captain. Take me to Marcus now." They moved through corridors, Torres explaining in nervous bursts. "Routine patrol. Questionable behavior. Standard procedure." His words painted Mitchell's actions as reasonable, justified, unremarkable. Harrison listened with growing fury, cataloguing every excuse for later demolition. The holding cell came into view. Marcus sat on the concrete bench, head in his hands. He looked up at his father's footsteps. Relief and shame warred across his young face. "Dad." Harrison's heart broke. His son, his brilliant, gentle, careful son, sat behind bars like a criminal. "I'm here." "I'm getting you out." "Sir, we'll need to complete the release paperwork," Torres began. "You'll release him immediately, or I'll have every judge in this county demanding answers." Harrison's voice dropped to dangerous quiet. "My son was illegally detained, held without phone access, processed on fabricated charges. Open this cell. Now." Torres fumbled for keys. The lock clicked open. Marcus stepped out slowly, rubbing his wrists where the handcuffs had chafed. Father and son embraced briefly, Harrison's hand cradling the back of Marcus's head. "Are you hurt?" "No, just—" Marcus's voice wavered. "He lied, Dad, in his report. He lied about everything." Footsteps echoed down the corridor. Officer Derek Mitchell appeared, summoned by Torres's urgent call. He walked with confidence until he saw the judge's face. Then his stride faltered. Harrison turned slowly. His eyes locked onto Mitchell with judicial intensity. The officer who'd arrested his son. The man who'd put his child in a cage for walking home. "Officer Mitchell." Harrison's voice could freeze flames. "That's my son you have in your holding cell." Mitchell's face cycled through emotions. Confusion, recognition, horror. The confident officer from earlier dissolved, replaced by a man realizing his terrible mistake. "Sir, I didn't know he was a judge's son." Harrison stepped closer. "Or didn't know he was a human being deserving of respect and due process." Silence crashed through the corridor. Every officer within earshot froze. This moment would define careers, reputations, lives. Mitchell's mouth opened, closed, no words came. His certainty from earlier had evaporated, leaving only the cold reality of consequences approaching. Judge Harrison's voice dropped to a whisper, more terrifying than any shout. "What crime did my son commit, Officer Mitchell? What probable cause justified this arrest?" The question hung in the air, unanswerable. They all knew the truth now. Marcus's only crime had been his skin color in the wrong neighborhood. Everything else was Mitchell's assumptions made manifest. "We'll address this properly," Harrison said, his tone shifting to something colder, more formal. "Through the system you claim to serve. I'm filing a formal complaint. You'll face a hearing. And Officer Mitchell." He paused, letting the weight settle. "I'll be presiding." Captain Torres's office felt smaller with 5 people crowded inside. Judge Harrison sat with Marcus beside him, the teenager's jaw still clenched tight. Officer Mitchell stood near the door, Captain Torres behind his desk. Sergeant O'Brien lingered awkwardly, caught between loyalty and liability. "Let's address this calmly," Torres began, his voice straining for diplomatic neutrality. Officer Mitchell followed protocol for a suspicious person stop. Perhaps the situation escalated unnecessarily, but there was no situation. Harrison's interruption carried judicial precision. There was a teenager walking home. Everything else was Officer Mitchell's invention. Mitchell stepped forward, desperation creeping into his voice. "Judge Harrison, with respect, your son was in an upscale neighborhood after dark. He couldn't adequately explain his presence. His behavior suggested what exactly?" Harrison's eyes narrowed. "Walking? Carrying a backpack? Being 17? He was nervous, defensive." Mitchell's hands gestured, grasping for justification. "In my experience, that indicates guilt. I've made hundreds of arrests based on behavioral cues. Or perhaps," Harrison said softly, dangerously, "he was nervous because an armed officer was treating him like a criminal for existing. Did that possibility enter your assessment, officer?" Mitchell's jaw worked silently. He wanted to argue, to defend his instincts, his training, his 15-year career. But doubt had crept in now, poison in his certainty. Marcus spoke for the first time since entering the office. "I told you where I was going. I showed you my ID. I opened my backpack. What else could I have done?" "You were evasive," Mitchell started. "I answered every question." Marcus's voice carried steel. "You decided I was guilty before I opened my mouth." Torres raised his hands. "Gentlemen, perhaps we can find middle ground here. Officer Mitchell, you admit the arrest may have been premature." Mitchell hesitated. Admitting fault meant paperwork, investigations, marks on his record. But the judge's son sat 3 feet away. The evidence of his mistake made flesh. "I made a judgment call based on available information." "Available information?" Harrison leaned forward. "My son's skin color in a white neighborhood. That was your available information. That's not fair." Mitchell's voice hardened. "I don't see color. I see behavior patterns. You see what you expect to see." Harrison's voice cut like a scalpel. "And tonight you expected my son to be a criminal, so you made him one." The silence stretched. Torres shuffled papers nervously. O'Brien studied his shoes. Mitchell's hands clenched and unclenched, his entire worldview under assault. "Judge Harrison," Torres tried again, "I'm sure we can resolve this internally. Officer Mitchell will attend additional sensitivity training. We'll review our stop-and-question protocols. No need for formal complaints or, oh, there's every need." Harrison stood, Marcus rising beside him. "This isn't about sensitivity training. It's about accountability. Officer Mitchell violated my son's civil rights. He falsified details in his report. He denied him timely phone access. These aren't protocol errors, they're abuses of power." Mitchell's face flushed. "I was doing my job, protecting that neighborhood from what? Honor students? Debate team captains?" Harrison's voice rose. "Tell me, officer, what exactly were you protecting them from?" The question landed like a bomb. Everyone in the room heard what went unspoken. Mitchell's face drained of color. He wanted to argue, to protest, but the truth sat bare between them now. "This hearing will proceed formally," Harrison said, moving toward the door, "through proper channels. I won't be filing criminal charges, Officer Mitchell, but I will ensure this goes on record, that your actions face scrutiny, that you answer for what you did tonight." "Your Honor," Torres began. "Captain, my son spent 4 hours in a holding cell for walking while black. That's unacceptable." Harrison paused at the door. "The hearing is scheduled for next Tuesday, 9 a.m. I suggest Officer Mitchell prepares his defense thoroughly." Mitchell's voice emerged small, desperate. "You're really going to preside over this? Your own son's case?" Harrison turned, his face unreadable. "I'm the most impartial judge available, officer, because I know exactly how much weight fairness should carry. The question is, do you?" They left. The office door closed with quiet finality. Torres looked at Mitchell, disappointment heavy in his gaze. "You arrested a judge's kid for walking home," Torres said flatly. "Jesus Christ, Derek." Mitchell slumped into a chair. His certainty from earlier had dissolved completely, leaving only cold dread. A judge's son, a formal hearing. His career suddenly balanced on a knife's edge. He'd been so sure, so absolutely certain he'd rid the situation correctly. Now doubt consumed everything. Outside, Marcus and his father walked to their car in silence. The night air felt cold after the precinct's stale warmth. Marcus finally spoke. "He's not going to learn anything from this." Harrison glanced at his son. "Maybe not, but the system will hear what happened. That matters, does it?" Marcus's voice carried new cynicism, aging him beyond 17. "He'll get a slap on the wrist. Everything goes back to normal." "Nothing changes." Harrison stopped walking. He placed both hands on his son's shoulders. "Then we make sure something changes. We do this right. By the book. Through the proper channels. We show that accountability exists." Marcus wanted to believe him. Wanted to trust that his father's faith in the system wasn't misplaced. But tonight had taught him different lessons. The law protected some people more than others. Justice bent toward power. And being right meant nothing without leverage. Still, he nodded. What else could he do? They drove home through streets that felt different now. Every patrol car a potential threat. Every white neighborhood a gauntlet. Marcus had left for SAT prep that afternoon as one person. He returned home someone else entirely. The system his father loved had failed him. Now they'd see if it could correct itself. Or if accountability was just another pretty word with no teeth. 3 days later, Derek Mitchell stared at the official summons. Formal complaint hearing. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Presiding officer, the Honorable Judge William Harrison. He'd read it 20 times, hoping the words would change. They never did. His union rep, a grizzled veteran named Castellano, sat across from him at the coffee shop. This is bad, Derek, really bad. He can't be impartial. Mitchell's voice carried desperation. It's his own son. There's conflict of interest written all over this. Actually, there's not. Castellano stirred his coffee slowly. Harrison's got a reputation for being harder on personal cases. He recused himself when his nephew got a speeding ticket. But for complaints against officers, he wants to prove he's not showing favoritism, which means he's gonna throw the book at you to demonstrate fairness. Mitchell's stomach turned. So I'm screwed. You arrested a kid for walking. What did you think would happen? Castellano's tone wasn't unkind, just tired. Look, here's your play. Admit you made an error in judgment. Show remorse. Accept whatever training they offer. Keep your head down and hope this blows over. I didn't make an error. Mitchell's jaw set. My instincts were right. The kid was nervous, defensive. Stop. Castellano held up his hand. Don't finish that sentence. Don't even think it. Your instincts put a judge's son in handcuffs for being black in the suburbs. That's not an instinct. That's a bias. And if you can't see the difference, you're going to lose a lot more than this hearing. The words hit like physical blows. Mitchell wanted to argue, to defend himself, but doubt had taken root now. He kept replaying the encounter. Marcus's face. The fear in those young eyes. The dignity even through humiliation. Had he been wrong? The question terrified him more than the hearing. His entire career rested on trusting his instincts. If those instincts were flawed, if his judgment was compromised, then what did that make him? Mitchell's phone buzzed. Text from Torres. Need to see you now." He drove to the precinct in numb silence. Torres waited in his office, face grave. "Derek, sit down. What's happened?" "Marcus Harrison filed a public records request for your dashcam footage." Torres slid a report across the desk. "Legal reviewed it this morning." Mitchell's blood ran cold. And your report doesn't match the video?" "At all." Torres's voice hardened. "You wrote that he was evasive and resisted questioning. The footage shows him answering every question calmly. You wrote that he exhibited suspicious behavior. The footage shows him walking normally with hands visible. I described what I observed. You described what you wanted to see." Torres cut him off. "This footage is going to be played at your hearing. In front of Judge Harrison, in front of anyone who attends. And Derek." It's damning. Mitchell's world tilted. His carefully constructed justifications crumbled like sand castles against tide. The video didn't lie, couldn't be reinterpreted through instinct or experience. "What do I do?" Torres leaned back, exhaustion in every line. "You pray Judge Harrison believes in second chances, because that footage shows a teenager doing nothing wrong and an officer seeing crime anyway. The only question Harrison's going to ask is why." Mitchell already knew why, had known since that moment in the precinct when he'd seen Marcus's face and felt uncomfortable. The answer sat in his gut like poison. He'd seen a black kid in a white neighborhood and assumed the worst. His training, his instincts, his 15-year career, all built on assumptions he'd never examined. Until those assumptions destroyed an innocent kid's evening and maybe his own future. "The hearing's in 4 days," Torres said quietly. "Figure out how to answer that question honestly. It's your only shot." Mitchell left the office in a daze. 4 days. 100 hours to prepare for questions he didn't know how to answer. How do you defend the indefensible? How do you justify seeing crime where none existed? That night he watched the dashcam footage on his laptop, watched himself approach Marcus with hostility already set, watched the kid comply with every request, watched his own hands move toward his weapon over nothing, watched himself create a criminal from thin air. His wife found him at the kitchen table at 2 a.m. The footage paused on Marcus's face. Young, frightened, confused, she sat beside him without speaking. "I thought I was right," Mitchell whispered. "I was so sure." She took his hand, said nothing. What could she say? On the other side of town, Marcus lay awake too. The hearing approached like a storm on the horizon. Part of him wanted to face Mitchell, to see accountability happen. Part of him just wanted to forget, to move forward, to reclaim the safety he'd felt before. But safety was illusion now, one he couldn't unsee. His phone lit up with a message from his debate team coach. "Are you okay? Heard what happened. Here if you need to talk." Word had spread. The story was leaking beyond family, beyond the precinct. Marcus Harrison, judge's son, arrested for walking while black. The narrative was forming, taking shape, growing beyond his control. Tuesday would change everything. For him, for Mitchell, for everyone watching to see if the system his father believed in could actually deliver justice. The question neither of them could answer yet. What would justice even look like? 4 days until they found out. Derek Mitchell sat in his car outside the precinct Monday evening, 20 hours before the hearing. He couldn't bring himself to go inside. Couldn't face the looks from colleagues who'd heard about the dashcam footage. The Brotherhood of Blue had limits. Lines you didn't cross. Arresting a judge's kid for nothing. Crossed every line and invented new ones. His phone showed 7 missed calls. 3 from Castellano, 2 from Torres, 2 from numbers he didn't recognize. Probably press. The story had leaked over the weekend. Local news picked it up Sunday night. Officer faces hearing after arresting judge's son without cause. Mitchell's name hadn't been released yet. "Professional courtesy," Torres said. But everyone at the precinct knew. Everyone in the county courthouse knew. His anonymity had days at most. His wife had been quiet all weekend, supportive but distant, like she was watching a stranger wear her husband's face. Their kids asked why Daddy seemed sad. He had no answer that wouldn't break their hearts. The worst part was the silence from other officers. No texts of support, no calls checking in, just deafening absence where camaraderie used to live. The thin blue line had shifted, and Mitchell found himself on the wrong side. He'd replayed the arrest 1,000 times. Each replay revealed new details he'd missed. Marcus's careful movements, his deliberate speech, the way he'd kept his hands visible without being asked. The kid had known exactly how to survive a police encounter. And Mitchell had arrested him anyway. Sunday afternoon, unable to sleep, Mitchell had driven to Maple Ridge, parked on the same street. Watched people walk by, white joggers, white dog walkers, white teenagers with backpacks. His eyes followed them automatically, assessing threat levels. None registered as suspicious. Not one. Then he'd imagined Marcus walking the same route, same backpack, same purposeful stride, and felt his instincts shift, alarms triggering for reasons that suddenly seemed grotesque. He'd sat there for an hour, watching his own bias manifest in real time. The pattern recognition that had made him a good cop was the same mechanism that had destroyed Marcus's evening and his own career. Two sides of one poisoned coin. Mitchell drove home as sunset painted the sky orange and purple. His house looked the same. Neat lawn, American flag on the porch, basketball hoop in the driveway. But everything felt different now. Like coming home to a stage set instead of actual life. Inside, his daughter practiced piano. The notes drifted through open windows, innocent and pure. Mitchell stood on the porch listening, and felt something crack inside his chest. What would he do if someone treated his daughter the way he'd treated Marcus? If an officer saw her as threat instead of child? If her explanations meant nothing against someone else's assumptions? The thought made him physically ill. His wife appeared in the doorway. "Derek, you coming in?" He looked at her, this woman who'd believed in him for 20 years, who'd raised his children while he served the badge. "I don't know how to fix this." She stepped onto the porch, taking his hand. "Maybe you can't fix it. Maybe you just have to face it." Tomorrow he'd face it in front of Judge Harrison, Marcus, and anyone who chose to witness. The footage would play. Questions would come. And Mitchell would have to answer, without the armor of certainty that had protected him for 15 years. He was terrified, not of losing his job, though that fear lived in him too. Terrified of the truth he'd been avoiding since that moment in Torres's office. He'd become the kind of cop he'd always claimed didn't exist. The kind who saw color first, humanity second. The kind whose badge amplified prejudice instead of protecting against it. Tomorrow would reveal whether recognition could lead to redemption, or whether some mistakes carved too deep for healing. The piano music continued inside. His daughter's innocent voice called, "Daddy, listen to this part." Mitchell went inside, sat beside her on the bench. Listened to her play, tried to memorize this moment before everything changed, because tomorrow, one way or another, the man his children thought he was would disappear. The question was, who would take his place? Marcus sat across from his father in the study, the dashcam footage frozen on the laptop screen. They'd watched it 4 times already, Judge Harrison taking notes with judicial precision. "This is strong evidence," Harrison said quietly. "It contradicts Mitchell's report on every significant point." Marcus nodded, but his stomach churned. The footage showed his fear plainly. The trembling hands, the careful movements, the barely controlled panic when Mitchell's hand moved toward his weapon. Everyone would see it. His classmates, his teachers, the colleges recruiting him. Everyone would see him afraid. "Dad, do I have to be there?" The question came out smaller than intended. Harrison looked up from his notes. "You don't have to do anything." "But Marcus, your testimony matters. The footage shows what happened. Your words explain what it felt like. I don't want to relive it." Marcus's voice cracked slightly. "I just want to forget and move on." "I understand." Harrison closed the laptop gently. "But son, this isn't just about you anymore. It's about every kid who gets stopped for walking. Every teenager whose explanations mean nothing. Your voice can change things. Marcus wanted to believe that. Wanted to trust that speaking up mattered. But cynicism had taken root, poisonous and persistent. Mitchell will get suspended, maybe fired, then what? Another officer makes the same call tomorrow. Nothing changes. Not if we make this mean something. Harrison's voice carried the weight of 30 years on the bench. Not if we use this moment to expose the patterns, the assumptions, the systemic failures that make these stops routine. Pretty speech, Dad, but we both know the system protects its own. Marcus stood, pacing to the window. You're the exception. Most judges would have swept this under the rug. Harrison absorbed the criticism without flinching. His son wasn't wrong. The machinery of justice bent toward protecting power, maintaining status quo. Individual officers faced consequences. Systems rarely did. But the alternative was accepting defeat before the fight began. Marcus, look at me. Harrison waited until his son turned. This hearing won't fix everything. You're right about that. But it's a start. It puts on record what happened. It forces Mitchell to answer questions he's never faced. It shows other officers that accountability exists. For a judge's son, Marcus's words landed heavy. What about kids whose fathers aren't judges? What protects them? The question hung between them, unanswerable and devastating. Harrison had spent his career believing the system worked equally. His son's arrest had revealed that lie in brutal clarity. I don't know, Harrison admitted, but we can't let that stop us from fighting for accountability where we can enforce it. Marcus returned to the desk slowly. On the screen, his own frozen face stared back, 17 years old and terrified. Okay, I'll testify, but not for the system. For the next kid, Mitchell stops. So maybe he thinks twice. That's enough. Harrison squeezed his son's shoulder. That's more than enough. They spent the next hour preparing. Harrison asked questions Marcus would face, helping him structure responses that balanced truth with composure. The judge's trial experience showed. He knew how to guide without scripting, to strengthen without controlling. They'll try to paint you as defensive or hostile, Harrison warned. Castellano will suggest you escalated the situation through attitude. I was polite. The footage shows that, I know. But they'll focus on your nervousness, your questions about why you were being stopped. They'll frame cooperation as resistance. Harrison's voice hardened. That's how these things work. Turn reasonable questions into suspicious behavior. Marcus felt anger kindle. So I'm supposed to accept being stopped for nothing? Just comply silently and hope not to get shot? No. You're supposed to survive. Then fight later in places like tomorrow's hearing, where your voice carries weight your silence never could. Harrison met his son's eyes. I hate that this is the world we live in. But we navigate what exists while working to change it. The doorbell rang. Harrison checked his watch. 8 p.m. He wasn't expecting anyone. He opened the door to find a young black woman holding a camera. Judge Harrison? I'm Keisha Williams, independent journalist. I've been covering police misconduct cases for 3 years. May I speak with you about tomorrow's hearing? Harrison hesitated. Press attention could help or hurt, depending on framing. I'm not here for scandal, Keisha continued quickly. I want to document systemic patterns. Your son's case matters because it exposes how routine these stops are, how arbitrary. Most victims don't have your platform. Marcus appeared behind his father. Let her in. Harrison glanced back, surprised. Marcus's expression was determined, older somehow. If we're doing this, let's do it right. Tell the full story. They sat in the living room, judge, teenager, journalist. Keisha asked careful questions, drawing out details the official record wouldn't capture. What Marcus felt when Mitchell's hand moved toward his weapon. The humiliation of handcuffs, the hours in holding waiting for his voice to matter. This hearing could set precedent, Keisha said, reviewing her notes. Judge presiding over complaint against officer who arrested his son. That's unprecedented transparency, or massive conflict of interest, depending who's reporting. I'm the most qualified judge available, Harrison said firmly. I understand exactly what's at stake, and I won't let personal connection compromise my impartiality. Keisha smiled slightly. That's the line that'll make headlines. Judge promises impartiality in son's case. It'll either prove the system works or expose its deepest contradictions. She left an hour later with enough material for a feature story. Marcus watched her go, feeling strange relief. The story was public now. No more hiding, no more shame. If he was going to be the judge's son arrested for walking, he'd own that story, shape it, use it. Tomorrow would test whether the system his father believed in could deliver justice for someone like him. And the whole county would watch the answer unfold. The hearing room filled by 8:45. Marcus sat in the front row beside his mother, her hand gripping his. Community members packed the gallery, activists, journalists, concerned citizens. This wasn't just a complaint hearing anymore. It was a referendum. Officer Derek Mitchell entered at 8:50, Castellano beside him. He looked diminished somehow, the confidence that had defined him replaced by hollow anxiety. His eyes found Marcus across the room, held for a moment, then dropped. At 9 precisely, Judge William Harrison entered. Everyone stood. The bailiff announced, "All rise for the Honorable Judge William Harrison presiding over formal complaint case H2477. Harrison took his seat, arranging papers with mechanical precision. When he looked up, his face showed no trace of the father who'd held Marcus 3 nights ago. This was the judge, impartial, exacting, uncompromising. This hearing addresses formal complaint filed by Marcus Harrison against Officer Derek Mitchell regarding events of October 6th. Harrison's voice carried through the room. Due to personal relationship with the complainant, I acknowledge potential conflict of interest. However, I believe my professional commitment to impartiality makes me uniquely qualified to preside." He paused, eyes sweeping the gallery. "Any party who objects may state their grounds now." Silence. Even Castellano didn't challenge it. Everyone understood. This judge was offering Mitchell more fairness than Marcus had received. "Officer Mitchell, you're not on trial for criminal conduct. This is administrative review of your actions and adherence to department policy. You have right to counsel, to present evidence, and to question witnesses. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor." Mitchell's voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly. "Mr. Harrison, you may present your complaint." Marcus stood, moving to the witness stand. The room fell silent. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat. From this angle he could see everyone, his father elevated on the bench, Mitchell at the defense table, the gallery watching with hungry attention. "Tell us what happened on October 6th, Harrison said gently. Marcus took a breath, then began. "I left the library at 6:15 after SAT prep. I was walking home through Maple Ridge. I live on Oakwood, 2 blocks from where Officer Mitchell stopped me. I was listening to music, thinking about college applications. Just walking." He described the patrol car pulling over, Mitchell's aggressive approach, the demands for ID, the escalating tension despite his compliance.